Good afternoon, everybody. We are on air live from the Centre of Excellence Exhibition Centre here at UWC. Welcome to this, the third and final of our Habitable Planet online broadcasts. I'm apologising now for our slight delay to the starting time and for the change of the location of the live event. I hope everybody's found it. We've done our best to make sure that everybody's got that. Unfortunately, we did have a couple of technical issues with setting up here at UWC. Anyway, to press on ahead, it's with great pleasure that we're able to broadcast to you today. We have a range of really exciting guests who are going to both deal with the questions that you guys have had on the course so far, and they're going to engage around that and try and start some interesting discussions once again. And then hopefully at some point during the discussion, we will have a visit from, I'm told actually this time now it's the president of the country, Minister Pandor, not unfortunately Zuma, but Zuma is out of the country and Pandor is deputy, so she is the acting president. So we'll be very honoured to have the acting president of the country join us, and she will also be able to answer a few of your questions. I'm going to firstly just go around our panel and get them to give themselves a little introduction, so we know who we've got, and then we'll press on to answering your questions. I will go around starting here next to me. And Busisiwe, would like to introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, I'm Sibongile. So I am from the University of Mavuso, and I'm an honors student. I'm about to finish my double honors in geology and paleontology, mostly majoring in paleontology. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll head around those distributed. We'll do it in the furthest from here first. So I think that will be Lauren, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Excellent. So my name is Lauren Biermann, and I apologize if there are some delays, but I'm streaming in from Scotland, where I'm doing my PhD in oceanography and marine science. And I'm really looking forward to this panel discussion today.
Nice one.
Thanks,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lauren. The next way is probably Hope. Hope, can you hear us? You introduce yourself.
Sorry. Yeah, I can hear you, Carl. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Hope, go ahead.
Can you hear me, Carl?
Yes, we can hear you fine, Hope. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. My name is Hope. From Northwest. From the Northwest University. I'm a planeteer, interested in Earth system science, computer science, and physics, and all in all. So thank you for inviting me to this hangout, and yeah, thanks once again.
Thank you, Hope. Next, I think it's Hector in
I can't hear you properly, Carl.
And next, it's Hector at the University of Venda.
Hi, Carl. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, it's Hector. My name is Hector Chikoore. I'm from the University of Venda. I'm an Access student, Access collaborator. I'm a meteorologist by training and also a climatologist. My PhD project deals with the climatology of meteorological droughts over the subcontinent. I've also dealt with issues around climate change and impacts on rain-fed agricultural production. Smith Cup.
Okay, nice one. Thank you, Hector. Then next, I get close. Guy, hold up, go with Guy first.
Hi there. You want me to go as well?
Off you go.
Okay. I'm Guy Midgley. I'm a professor at the University of Stellenbosch. I'm an ecologist and have been since the early 1980s. My speciality is in the field of ecosystem science and biodiversity. I'm also an IPCC author, and I co-led the chapter which did the work behind the species extinction estimates in 2007. And this time around I did a chapter on adaptation. So that's me.
Perfect, very much. We're very, very lucky to have Guy here. I feel the and almost to home we have Teboho. Teboho, would you give yourself a brief introduction?
Hello, can you hear me? So my name is
Teboho. Go ahead.
All right, my name is Teboho. I'm from the University of Cape Town. I'm a candidate for a PhD in atmospheric science. I have a background in sustainable energy engineering, and I've done a few HPWs. So it's good to be here. Thanks.
Nice one. Thank you very much, Teboho. We will have also in the next room Sibongile joining us, and Rendani. They're still battling with the UWC connection, so we're going to press ahead without them and get on with the students' questions. Right, I'll just introduce them and get into the conversation. So I'm glad everybody has made it here. It's looking like we've got quite a few people viewing. I'm going to press right on to the students' questions, if I can find them. So we're towards the end of the Habitable Planet course now. And those who have been following since the beginning will have known that we started this course nearly 10 weeks ago, where we considered the fact that many, many worlds have now been discovered throughout the universe, but the Earth is one of those habitable. And we've now spent the last 10 weeks looking at what are the various parameters predicting why the Earth is habitable. And we went from Dumasani talking to us 10 weeks ago now about how we can look at distance from the Sun as an interesting parameter, but about how that's not actually one that can be used to explain it. So Mars is too cold and Venus is too hot. Simply the distance from the Sun is not adequate. Earth would be so cold if it were a ball of rock, just given distance from the Sun. So we need to add more to our model. Atmosphere. That is life. We've looked at the past. We've looked at paleoclimate. We've looked at biogeochemical feedbacks to climate. And now we come right to the end of the course. Having there's really parts to that. The first part is we looked at the evolution of species that's been so disruptive came to be in the Earth. And then secondly, we're going to look at the problem of human population, climate change, and then the solution of sustainable development. Now, we've been through this online, and we've seen lots of interesting stuff about that. And from that, I can see that you guys have had lots of interesting questions. And so we're going to start having a discussion around some of those. The first section we're going to look at is human evolution. And I just wanted to hand over to Lauren, who's just going to give us a little bit of a brief overview of what is human evolution, how does it link into climate, and why is it important in the story of a habitable planet? Lauren? Hello, Lauren.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry
We can hear you
about
now.
that. Okay. So what I was suggesting, Carl, and I think you'll agree with me, as with anything that you start, you should have a proper definition so that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about, correct? So I thought I would start by redefining evolution. What does evolution mean? Well, the way that it is defined is a change in the properties of populations of organisms or groups of such populations over the course of generations. So that's quite important. The development of an individual is not considered evolution. Individual organisms do not evolve. The changes in populations that are considered evolutionary are those that are heritable. In other words, those that are inherited and can be passed from one generation to the next through genetic material. So, Charles Darwin was the first to propose the theory of universal common descent, saying probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from one primordial form onto which life was first breathed. So we started all in the same place, and we have evolved through those heritable changes that I was talking about when I defined evolution to where we are today. And yeah, are we happy to start from there? Carl?
Okay, thank you very much, Lauren. Sorry, I had to duck out at the end of that. The governor who asks, is it possible to trace the one entity that humans emerged from, since they both share 98% of the genes? Lauren, you want to start us off?
Yes, so I'm going to say, unfortunately, probably not. And there's a good reason for that. The last universal common ancestor, also known as Luca, is the organism from which all organisms now living on Earth descended. And the Luca is estimated to have lived around 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. And it was a small single-celled organism. It would have had a cell wall and a ring-shaped coil of DNA floating freely within the cell, not unlike modern bacteria. So it most likely wouldn't have stood out against a collection of modern generalized bacteria, even if it had left some form of fossil record. So unfortunately, in order to find our first common ancestor, or Luca, we would need fossil evidence. And a single-celled bacterial cell, well, bacterial-like cell, that is not dissimilar to modern bacterial cells, it's very unlikely that we'd be able to find its record.
Thank you, Lauren. We have a comment here.
Just to briefly just address your question. When you say possible trade, I don't think there's one like definable entity to separate between humans and chimpanzees, because it's really more complicated than that. And the biggest problem is that the human record is very space. So on average, every one fossil we find of human remains represents about a million organisms at that time. So it's really hard to kind of address the question. But right now, we are thinking that it's at around 2 million years. This is because based on a fossil found in Chad a few years ago in 2006 by Burke, it's known as Hector, and it has a kind of mosaic features between apes and humans, but we're not sure whether it's the direct link, or as we know, it's called the missing link between humans. So we're not sure if it's that's what it is. But it is at around 8 million years ago. The fossil record is about 6 to 7 million years. So yeah, but you can't just say there's one trait. So that's answer the question.
Yes, so I apologize. I misunderstood the question and understood it as the entity that all life evolved from, but you're quite right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, well, I suppose the question could have been interpreted either way, so it doesn't really matter. The second question is linked into that, so I'm going to go straight into it, which is, if we evolved from monkeys, which is not quite true, and I'm sure we'll comment on that, how come we still share almost 98% DNA, yet this happened millions of years ago? So basically, if we separate millions of years ago, why do we still share so much of the DNA?
Okay, well, first of all, humans did not evolve from monkeys. We evolved from a common ancestor. And as was just said, we diverged from that common ancestor a very, very long time ago. So if we diverged so long ago, why do we share so much DNA? Well, that is because human genomes diverge by about 0.1% every million years. We are very, very slow at changing our DNA, whereas something like a virus will change DNA very quickly from one generation to the next. Now, remembering what I said about evolution, that an individual doesn't evolve, it's a group that shows heritable changes through the genetic material. And if we only diverge our own genomes by about 0.1% every million years, it is an extraordinarily slow process. So that is why, even though we diverged millions of years ago, we still share 98% of our DNA with chimps who also have a very, very slow mutation rate. Does that answer the question?
I have nothing else to add.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much for that. We're going to interrupt, I think, any minute now, as the minister is about to arrive to us. I'm going to go to the next question. The next question comes from Daniel Morofi, who asks, climate change affected vegetation. Okay, distribution of trees became uneven, we had this transition to savannas, but how did that lead to bipedalism? I'm going to pass to Lauren. Lauren, I apologize if I interrupted you. Lauren, put your microphone on.
It keeps switching itself off. Carl, I'm going to need you to help me with this, seeing as we're sharing this question. And I'm definitely not an expert on how humans became bipedal. But once the tree cover began to retract, and the land where humans were distributed began to become more grassland, it then became beneficial for the animals to move out of the trees because the trees were not nearly as dense, and to be able to survive on the grasslands. And from what I remember from Wendy Black's lectures on paleontology, human beings, well, hominids at that stage, developed an advantage by being able to stand on their hind legs in order to look for predators. Carl, do you want to fill in some gaps?
Actually, I think Guy would like to comment on this. Guy? Give the microphone on, Guy.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, this is a very, very interesting question, and it's a very exciting one to think about, because it tells us a lot about how we exist today and how big the changes are that we're facing going to. So when savannas evolved, the atmospheric CO2 level was dropping significantly, and that also contributed to the thinning of savannas. Probably also reduced the amounts of food in forests, and really caused a major ecological shift which affected the life of animals, including humans, early humans. And there were several advantages to being bipedal under those circumstances. If you've got a pair of hands, you can do an awful lot of things. We also had a pair of opposable thumbs, which allowed our early ancestors to do things like work with various kinds of tools, and we obviously were we lived in groups, so started to become very sociable. And that then allowed the human young to have a longer childhood. And all these various elements fit together in driving the bipedalism and shift towards more of a meaty diet of the early humans.
To interrupt right now. Okay, 1 minute. So I'm going to take the next question, and again, I apologize if I interrupt. The next question, and I'm also going to buy, is so if we are all related and we all share common ancestry, how come we all look different and speak different languages? And that's from Shandell Mandy.
Sorry, did you want me to say something?
Yeah, you might have it on.
So the question is, how come we all speak different languages?
And look different. We're all related.
Well, we as a species moved out of Africa about 60 to 80,000 years ago, and the human family moved across the whole planet. And as we spread more broadly across the planet, languages evolve very fast, and culture evolves very fast with that movement of humans across the planet. And so, and we drifted apart a little bit genetically as well, very slightly. As Lauren said, we evolved very, very slowly, so that drift is tiny. And because the groups of humans were very small, the inherited characteristics of individual people in those original groups really set the stage for what those people look like. And so we evolved to look slightly different across the whole planet, and that's called the founder effect. Very interesting effect of when small populations then evolve into big populations. And along with that goes cultural evolution and language evolution, and it happens very rapidly because we've got big brains and we're sociable. We're the most sociable species on the planet, and the most peaceful species on the planet, actually, to each other, although you may not always think so. So that's essentially why these things happen so fast.
Okay, so I mean, really, the answer comes down to the way we developed into niches in a very small space of time. And I suppose the next question, which comes from Prince Hlengiwe, speaks to that. And I'm also going to put this to the guy, which is, what adaptations specifically do humans have to sunlight and to cold weather?
It's such a fabulous question. We adapt to sunlight through skin tone. And the very interesting thing about skin tone is that if you live at the equator, you've got plenty of sunshine and you're very exposed to ultraviolet radiation. So you need to have a dark skin tone to protect yourself from being burned by UVB. If, however, you live at high latitudes where it's colder and darker, you need to have a lighter skin tone because you also need vitamin D. So if the people that lived towards the poles had very dark skin, they wouldn't get enough vitamin D. And that sets the stage for a grade in skin tone from the tropics all the way through to the poles, where we gradually moved to as a species. And that's why you get all these grades of skin tones. And we adapt to the cold through using our brains, basically, and harvesting skins and from animals and various other and buildings around us. And that's so using skin tone and brains is the way that we've evolved to cope with those climatic conditions.
Brains is quite an interesting one, Guy, in so much as that needs to be distinguished. It's not a genetic, an evolutionary adaptation, but a social adaptation, right?
Correct. So we're very, very sociable, as I said, and we live in groups, normally very, very peacefully. and we have language, which is an incredible social tool that we have at our availability, which we think no other animals have. So we're unique in that sense.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're still going to be able to move on to the next question. I'm going to read this question word for word because I have to say I have a reasonable knowledge of the path of human evolution, but I don't understand every word in here. And it comes from Kabile Shlobi, who asks, and the human skull, the structural change is a sign of evolution. The positioning of the forum magnum. Can we use the resources that we've accumulated so far on the road of evolution for predicting structural evolution as to how human beings will look in 1,000 years from now? Can polydactyl be considered as the structural change that will account for evolution? And so I'm going to put that question to Hope, please.
Okay, thank you, Carl. It's a very interesting question, one that really needs a strategic answer. With regards to the foramen magnum, yes, it has the positioning of the foramen magnum has showed significant development to evolution as a sign of evolution. And I think the part whereby we talk about 1,000 years from now, whether can we use the resources that we have accumulated so far on the road for evolution, for predicting structural evolution as to how humans will look like in 1,000 years from now. I'd have to say, if we're going to be looking at paleoanthropology, 1,000 years from now is not many years. For example, 1,000 years ago was 1014, and in 1014 humans were still bipedal. So evolution takes a lot of time. It takes a long time for it to actually take place. It's not something that can take place in 1,000 years. So I think that on the question, the time should be increased, that we could have to measure evolution based on that. And I'd have to say one way we can look at this is, I'll try to relate something by involving a little bit of physics. Is a disaster that occurred in 1986, 1986, the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine. And the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine saw emissions of radioactive material into the atmosphere. So actually, researchers have been conducting research based on that, and because now the environment has been modified because of the radioactive content that has been emitted into the atmosphere, there's been a lot of change in the evolution of species that have been recorded. For example, some birds have, in a way, adapted, and some of the bugs have changed colors. Some of the spiders still are showing structural change.
Okay.
So actually,
I have to interrupt you. We have the minister here.
You've got 1 minute, Paul. Okay. Minister, you must ask just one question, please.
Just one question. Good afternoon. My name is Paul. But very pleasure to have you here. For these folks that can hear us, we have a bunch of students doing an online course. We're taking our education and training very seriously, which I know extended to these people. So the minute they're having a question and answer session with a whole bunch of scientists across the country, I thought we'd just ask them if they had any questions for you. One student, Mavuso Party, she asks you, during the last 5 years that you've been minister, have you seen a notable increase in the number of women in science?
Yes, we have. It's a very pleasing increase. We've just completed our research and development survey, which monitors how South Africa is performing in terms of productivity in science, but also in human capital development. And one of the outcomes of the survey is on the human resource side, we have invested very well in producing increased numbers of masters and doctoral candidates and women for one of the most productive countries in the world.
We certainly see a lot of them do other science. But most of them are still in very physical, coaching and rapid, etc.
This is one of our concerns with women graduates, that they are still going into the traditional science fields, the medical sciences, and many in microbiology, but we're not seeing enough in engineering, in the physical sciences, and
you are the president right now, the acting president.
I have been acting, but I think it's over today.
It's over today.
Everybody else, all sorts of things. Can you do this? You know, so I'm glad it's over.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Look, the head's big now. Hang on. All right, Hope, so carry on there, please. Carry on with the answer. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, carry on now. Sorry, Carl.
You may carry on.
Okay. On the question whereby can we say polydactyly be considered structural change that will account for evolution, I'd say that polydactyly is a congenetic syndrome. It has been classified as a congenetic syndrome. So actually, and the word structural, for us bringing structural on that question to say that it is a structural change, some of the polydactyly cases that have been recorded showed no structural appearance or showed no structural presence, so to say. For example, polydactyly that occurs on the finger, one would get like an extra digit over here. And actually, if we look at that part, we would notice that there is no sort of like a bone joining it. It's just an extra digit. And normally, it also would happen to the feet and so forth. So actually, and there has been earlier cases of polydactyly occurring. For example, during 100 BC, it was still apparent there. So it can be considered as, we can account it as part of evolution, so to say. Yeah, that's my take on that.
Nice one, thank you, Hector. My apologies, I continue midway there. I'm going to press on. Really interesting question I have now. This comes from James Nahamona. And James asks, are humans still evolving, or is the process complete? And I'm going to put that to Guy, please. Guy, we have you twice. One of you needs to answer that.
Guy's evolving, he's toned himself.
Hello, Guy, can you hear us?
I can. I'm suffering some connectivity issues. Maybe you can delete that previous incarnation of me. That one, please.
I don't think I can delete you. So.
Really?
I can eject you. Let me see.
I don't think it has any effect. It's a.
There you are. I've ejected you.
Well done.
All right. The questions to you is: are humans still evolving? That's quite an interesting question to ask.
Are evolving. All living organisms with DNA, populations evolve as selection operates. So, I mean, a recent example is the outbreak of Ebola. Was quite a strong selection. It kills quite a lot of people, and people that survived were able to withstand the rigors of Ebola. So that's the kind of way in which evolution of humans can continue. It's a terrible example of how nature operates, and the fact that the world can be a very unfriendly place, and but also a testament to how amazingly we have used our brains to work against the natural processes of evolution. But that doesn't mean that those natural processes aren't there anymore. So I hope that serves as a kind of an example of how evolution through disease continues to, selection through disease continues to shape the human population. Because we're such a vast population across the planet now, that process takes place in only one small corner of the planet, and so evolution is much more slow. But yes, of course, the species will continue to evolve.
Okay. I think the interesting thing about the question is that obviously evolution requires some consistent selective pressure. And there's a question as to whether there really is any selective pressure on humans anymore. I mean, pretty much everybody who's born in the Western world will survive long enough to reproduce. Is there anyone else who wants to comment on that? Or Guy again?
Well, maybe an interesting thing to reflect on is the fact that because our brains have grown so much bigger and we have this extended childhood period, the heads of babies has been getting progressively bigger since we've become the way that we are. And that puts quite a bit of pressure. That's an interesting selective pressure that operates, so that you can't have too big of a head, otherwise it's a real problem for women to deliver babies. But now we have things like caesarean sections, so who knows where caesarean section could release the constraint of giving birth in a natural way. But I just throw that in there as an interesting concept.
Yeah, anybody else want to come in on that? Lauren?
No, I think that was perfect.
Okay. I will move on then to the next question. Basically, actually, I should point out that we had quite a few questions, all on the same line as James's. We had Kalisa and Pac-Man and Sidas all asking this question about is evolution still going with humans. The next question I want to go to comes from Esther Nyanga. She says, we haven't seen any recent activities showing the potential of animals involved, including humans. Does it mean that evolution has stopped? And if not, how long will it be till it starts showing? So this is not necessarily just humans, but why don't we see animals evolving around us? Guy, you want to come in on that? Or shall I go to Lauren? It's up to you guys.
I think go to Lauren first. I was just typing a message actually to ask if you could mute the background noise of this.
There's not much I can do about it, unfortunately.
Okay. Lauren.
We're in the exhibition in a minute to two.
I'd be happy to answer this in conjunction with Guy, who's much more of an expert, obviously, than I am. So even though our rate of mutation is incredibly slow, that doesn't mean that it's stopping. We are constantly in a state of, as is our environment. That's what gives us an edge, is that selective pressure as well as evolution over time are, they don't stop as far as I know. And things are constantly evolving at different rates, so we see how viruses mutate very quickly. Bacteria will also mutate at a slightly quicker rate. I guess the key element here really is about time. Will we see humans evolve over our lifetimes? No. Will we see viruses evolve over our lifetimes? Absolutely. I don't know if that answers the question at all, Guy?
I think that's spot on. You know, the biggest threat we face is from ourselves. With our big brains, we've become so clever and developed so much technology that we've now developed enough explosive capacity to potentially wipe us out species. So we're one of the biggest threats to our own future existence. So without that, we will likely continue to evolve at a very slow rate. We need to get our act together and really use our brains.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Here's a really interesting one, and I'm going to put this open to whoever wants to comment. Chrissy Mulu says, as scientists, she basically asks that we were all very aware of the idea of genetic engineering when it comes to inserting genes into crops. But she asks, do you think it might be possible that in the near future we will look at inserting genes into humans? Would anybody like to come in on that? Put your hand up. Anybody want to speak? Otherwise, I'm giving it to Guy. Guy, it's yours.
We could, of course, we could genetically engineer humans right now. we've already played around with engineering sheep, and we've produced a clone of a sheep. I don't know if any of you remember Dolly, the clone. So, you know, what limits our ability there is the ethical things around what we want to do. And this could be a very powerful branch of medicine going into the future. If we could get into people's genomes and fix genetic diseases, and there are many of those, then, you know, we could potentially do that in future. So the answer to that is yes, definitely.
Thank you very much, Guy. Sorry, guys, I will try and remember to mute my microphone. Quite a lot going on to try and concentrate on at once. Last question in this section, and I think I'm going to direct this to Lauren as our marine scientist. But it's an interesting one. Andrew Hall asks that he wants to know, is evolution of species richer in aqueous or terrestrial habitats? Lauren, I'm putting you on the spot, you know, what's your feeling and why?
Well, like I was saying earlier, and again, I'm certainly not an expert, the rate of evolution is what determines how quickly an entire species will evolve. And you have viruses and bacteria in seawater as well as on land. So I'm going to cheat slightly and say that as long as you're looking at viruses and bacteria, you will probably see a very quick rate of change. But whether it is more obvious in terrestrial habitats or aquatic habitats, I think it's so hard to say. Perhaps we understand the ocean to be more uniform, where we see more obvious changes related to temperature and depth and salinity, which are the main drivers. Whereas on Earth, you have microclimates, which are less of a thing, perhaps, in aquatic environments. So I'm not really answering the question necessarily. The rate of change in aquatic environments might also be slightly slower in terms of the capacity of water to resist a lot of very quick changes. So I'm not really sure how to answer the question, but I don't think that the answer is an obvious answer. Small animals already are showing stress responses to changes in the pH of seawater, to the temperature of water, and they're unable really to keep up with how quickly those changes are happening. But the same may not be said for aquatic viruses and aquatic bacteria. Phytoplankton are already showing changes in distribution and abundance. So it's a very good question. It's just not a very easy one to answer. So I'm going to hand over to someone that might have a slightly more eloquent response.
Guy, you seemed like you had a response to that.
I think Lauren's right. You know, it's a very difficult question. I want to take a slightly different angle on it and say that if you look at the distribution of species richness across the planet, you find that the tropics are richer than the high latitudes, both in the ocean and on the land. So it looks as though more species can be maintained in tropical ecosystems where it's hotter and there's more energy potentially, and potentially where evolution either operates more quickly or where species are kept in the record for longer, or where they don't become extinct. Whereas where it's colder, there's less energy, evolution goes more slowly. And that seems to happen both on the land and in the ocean. Those patterns parallel one another. And it's an extremely interesting pattern. It's not been fully explained. So for students interested in ecology, this is a big question. If you answer it, you'll become world famous instantly. So try and do it. We really want an answer to this question, but it's a very difficult one. Lauren's right.
Nice one. Thank you very much, Guy. And I hope that actually there will be students out there who will be inspired to want to try and answer the question. They're on the human evolution topic, and we're going to move on to the second of our lectures, which was on climate change and why climate change is a big problem in terms of habitable planet. Ask the Hector, give us a bit of a summary as to how climate change fits into this story. Are you with us, Hector?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you. The climate change is a very important subject for discussion, especially at this time. It is now known that climate change is largely due to human activities, mainly the increase in the greenhouse gas emissions of the atmosphere, which has occurred mainly in the past 100 years. We know the temperatures have increased significantly from about 1951 to 2010, and it is now unequivocal, according to the IPCC, that climate change is occurring largely due to human activities as opposed to natural forcings such as solar cycles or for example, volcanic activity. And so, yes, the climate is changing, and the associated impacts may be felt in terms of the increasing air temperatures, increasing the ocean temperatures, as well as changing the patterns of weather and climate, and also altering the energy cycle, the water cycle, as well as the salinity of the oceans. And so climate change is a very important topic to discuss and is very relevant in this discussion. Carl?
Well, thank you very much. It's really nice, very concise summary, which I really appreciate. Thank you. So we're going to go on to, students have a lot of questions about climate change, and so we're going to try and get through as many of those. The first section really deals with is the anthropogenic climate change hypothesis. Is that how true is that hypothesis? Is it real? Are we doing it? And so I'm going to go around and just there's a few similar questions, but I think I'll mention them each. Neville Nash, who I know is actually here with us today at UWC, asks, is climate change real? And if so, what are the signs of it? Sibongile, I'm going to go to you first.
Hey, Carl, and hey, everybody. Can you guys hear me?
Perfectly. In fact,
Yeah.
I should maybe come and sit through there with you.
Okay. Okay, then. I think the question is saying, is climate change real? And if so, what are the signs, right?
But you can confirm the question because the guy who asked it is sat next to you.
Oh. Okay. Then. Yes. I think climate change is real, and some of the signs is there's been reports about glaciers melting and temperature increasing in the past 4 years, and also and the other question whether climate change is due to human activities. That hypothesis to a certain extent is true, but not entirely, because it can be human activities and also natural. So I don't think it's right to entirely say it's due to anthropogenic activities. Is that okay, Carl?
Well, I'll ask Guy to also come in on that. Guy, do you want to respond to that?
Huh?
Okay. We've got multiple guys spreading again. Guy, are you there? Can you respond to that? Yeah, you need to put your microphone on, Guy.
I'm sorry, I just missed the question.
Me too. Me too.
Hello?
What's the
Hi, Carl. I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Sorry, is climate change real? And if so, what are the signs of it?
Okay, good. Do you have all day? No, we've got signs in the surface temperature of the Earth, which shows that that's going on. We have signs in melting ice all over the place. Land ice is melting at an accelerated rate. We have signs in the ocean temperatures, which is warming to great depths. Even you can measure the warming boreholes down into the land. It's measured from space, and there are animals are responding by changing their geographic ranges, especially in the northern hemisphere. So if you don't believe the measurements that we take, the natural ecosystems are responding, and they don't lie. We can't fool nature. So we've got plenty of signs.
Okay, thanks, Guy. And that leads us on quite nicely to the next question. So, all right, both Guy and Sibongile have said, we can see that climate change is definitely happening. The world is definitely getting warmer. But we had two questions, one from Gibbon and Kosi and one from Munoma who both basically ask, okay, climate change is happening, and we can see that, but how do we know that this is a natural cycle? Climate's always changed in the past. We would totally expect it to carry on changing. I'm going to go to Hector first, and then I'm quite sure Guy and or Lauren will come in on that. Hector.
Okay, thanks, Carl. I'm going to say that warming by the sun or other natural variations in natural systems such as volcanic activity cannot explain global warming and climate change entirely. In fact, of course, climate has changed in the past, as Morunwa has said, but that was largely due to natural factors, natural climate variability, natural climate change. But now the climate change we are experiencing is due largely to human activities. And so if you compare the kind of change that is caused by natural factors, changes in or variations in natural system, and the changes that are induced by human activity, mainly the increase of greenhouse gas emissions, mainly the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. In fact, now CO2 is at the highest concentrations ever. And you find, therefore, that the climate change, which may be induced, but if you compare the contribution of natural factors such as solar variability as well as volcanic activity, compared with the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, you find that the contribution of natural factors is far too small compared to the anthropogenic factors. Therefore, climate change is unequivocal, and largely the current climate change is largely due to the greenhouse gas concentrations, and therefore it cannot be comparable to past climate changes.
Hey, thanks, Hector. Lauren or Guy, you want to wait? Do you have something to say? I'm taking that as Hector has dealt with that question very comfortably. I'll ask the last one in this section, and I will direct this initially, I think, to Lauren. Do the errors that have been widely reported in the IPCC report undermine in their science?
Okay, so I don't think errors in science are the reason for undermining. I don't think that the confidence is undermined. I think, however, and this is a slightly different issue, the way that scientists communicate has definitely improved since the 2007 report. But it's very difficult for the public to understand the way that science works, which is through calculations. So we are working with the best data that we have available to us at any given time, and fortunately, well, At the moment, we are gathering more empirical data, so data that we can observe and measure ourselves. But previously, we did rely perhaps quite heavily on model data, which immediately introduces a bit of suspicion on behalf of the public. And the error is, it doesn't undermine the confidence in the report. It perhaps had a negative impact on how the public perceived the report. And I think as scientists, we do have a responsibility to be better at communicating what error is, what bias is, what sample size we're working with, what correlation really means, and also that scientists are human. So no, I definitely don't think it undermines the confidence in the report at all, but I do think we can communicate better at how scientists work and how science itself works. I don't know if I've answered the question. Guy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Lauren, I don't know why you're asking the question. Of course, Dawn's answer.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
As an IPCC author, I should just jump in quickly. Thanks so much, Laura, for that, and Carl. I'll just be very quick. There were 3 or 4 relatively minor errors in a 4,000 or 3,000 to 4,000 page report 2007. That's an error rate of 0.0001%. But nonetheless, the media jumped on those errors and really tried to create a lot of uncertainty around the science. So we've got to watch out for that. Communicate, as you said, Laura, communicate clearly where we are certain and where we are uncertain, and be honest about it. But it did do some damage, and but I think the recent IPCC report has removed that damage to a large extent.
Absolutely.
Brilliant, thanks, guys. I'm gonna push on. We have a couple of questions now. Just one question actually about the modelling process itself in relation to climate change. And it reminds me of a quote from George Philander, who was once asked about how the models work and what assumptions go into them. And George said, yes, your model is only as good as the assumptions that go into it. And there are some bad ones. But on the other hand, you know what goes into sausages, and you still eat them. The question comes from Nigel Jalazi, and he asks, what are the parameters that go into a climate change model? I'm going to start with Hector.
Am I there?
You're here, yes. What parameters do you put into a climate change model?
Okay. Climate change models are largely just like if you look, there are different models. There are weather models, there are climate models, and then there are climate change models. And weather models, it is the initial conditions which are the important variables. With climate models, it is mainly the lower boundary conditions, which is usually the oceans, the conditions at the lower boundary of the atmosphere. And then with climate change models, it is more the composition of the atmosphere, because if you change the climate, if you change the chemistry of the atmosphere, you change, therefore, you disturb the energy balance of the atmosphere, and therefore you change the climate. And so, to a large extent, the climate change models are governed by the way the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, will evolve. And that is why we have several scenarios going forward to 2100. We don't have one projection for climate change. There are several scenarios depending on how the globe or communities will respond to mitigation of greenhouse gases. And so you find, therefore, that the chemistry of the atmosphere, it plays an important role, and therefore is a major component of the climate change models.
Nice one. Thank you, Hector. That was a very comprehensive answer. And we're going to move on to looking at understanding the impact of climate change. there's a whole bunch of questions that the students had with regard to what are going to be the impacts of climate change. But I'm going to start with one of the more unusual ones, and I think quite an interesting question, which comes from Jennifer Mahale. And Jennifer asks, is climate change a negative thing to the world? I've noticed, I think we have Hlengiwe joined us. Are you there, Hlengiwe?
Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me?
We can hear you beautifully. Could you just give us an introduction to who you are and then an attempt to answer that question, please?
I should tell you who I am.
Yes, please.
Oh, okay.
Well, not me, I know who you are. Tell the students.
Oh, okay. I'm Hlengiwe Radebe, and I'm currently a master's student at University of Witwatersrand, and I'm concentrating on interdisciplinary global change studies. So, answering the question as to is climate change a negative thing to the world, the entire world? If we look at the world as one system, as we're taught in the habitable planet, we realize that it is a negative thing. Even though there are some sections in the areas where there will be benefits that people may get, but then the overall impacts of it will be negative for the entire world. In terms of the fact that there is no longer the balance of what is there's no longer a balance of what the earth system has always had. So if we put it into one system, that will overall have a negative impact, not only for the urban areas, but then for the rural and for the developing and developed world as well.
Okay, so your point is that it's going to be a negative thing because it's different to current conditions that we expect and are adapting to. If I surmise rightly, Hlengiwe.
Sorry, please repeat that.
I'm summarizing your point is that climate change is negative for everybody because it marks a rapid departure from the conditions that we've adapted to, the conditions that we're used to. Is that right?
Sorry, Carl, you're not very clear. I can't hear you properly.
I'm trying to say that climate change, you're saying, is a problem because it's very, very different from what we're used to. The climate will be different.
Yes.
When you have a lovely warm country like you do, if you come from the far north, a warmer climate might be something of a benefit, I would have thought. Anybody want to comment? Hey, guy, was that a yes you want to comment, or a yes you?
Yeah, no, sure, I'll comment. Absolutely, there's winners and losers in the climate change, and for farmers, say in cold areas that lose a lot of stock every year because of freezing conditions, a warming climate might give benefit. For rich farmers growing wine in southern England, where the wine quality is now improving because of a warming climate, they see some benefits. So, but for people living in extremely hot countries where their agriculture is already very close to those limits, it would be very negative. So one's got to look at every situation to see. But on balance, if you look across the world, the Stern report and other sort of global reports suggest that on balance, it's very negative. It could be potentially negative. The warmer it gets, the more negative it gets on balance for the world as a whole.
If I may jump in there and just add that it doesn't really matter if you're living in a warm or cold climate, the chances of an extreme event are significantly higher. And that could be through flooding or storms or drought, and that's ubiquitous. So even though the changes are different from place to place, the likelihood of extreme events are increased, and that's where it's, negative.
But when they an extreme event, can that not also be extremely normal? Either way, it could be extremely good or not.
Carl, could you please repeat? I'm not sure if we heard you.
Could an extreme event be a good thing? I mean, could you have an extremely long period of mild conditions, for example? Or would the extreme events only be bad extremes?
So the extremes to which I was referring, and guys perhaps better this, are things like very warm temperatures for extended periods of time, which have enormous financial consequences, for example, particularly if that's arable land or cropland. By definition, an extension of a mild event wouldn't necessarily be considered an extreme event. It might just be considered anomalous or different from the norm. I can't, when I speak of extreme events, I speak of elevated temperatures that are outside of our comfort zone as human beings, but also temperatures that cause crop failures. I'm talking about flooding. I'm talking about massive storms. So when I talk about extreme events, I don't mean an extension of a mild summer, which would just be considered perhaps anomalous. I don't know if I'm making this point very well.
No, that makes perfect sense. We've now got multiple Tebohos joining the conversation, inviting this evolution of different people. Okay, I'm going to move on to a question from Tan Campbell, who asks, are the impacts of climate change to flora and fauna irreversible? I'm going to send that to the guy first because I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say on it. Guy?
Sorry, I didn't know it was me. I've now in a complete panic because I've forgotten the question. Is it irreversible? No, I remember now. Well, if it involves an extinction, essentially yes. Then it could be deemed irreversible. But nature, the natural system is a highly resilient one. And we know that the world has gone through very, very significant climate changes in the past, even associated with the planet being hit by a comet. And although we suffered extinctions initially, the world recovered. But on our timescales, on human timescales, we could run into some problems with almost irreversible impacts of climate change. For example, on things, species that live in coastal areas which might lose their habitat, coral reefs which might become lost as habitats, and in fact we're seeing some of that happening already, and some of those changes potentially are irreversible, and as I said, an extinction is irreversible. So the answer is yes and no, and the lower we keep the temperature change, the lower the risk of running into those irreversible changes.
Nice one, thank you, Guy. Next question I'm going to go for comes from Nandile Tonga. I'm going to put this to Sibongile, please. Nandile wants to know what are the effects of climate change on food production? Sibongile, are you with us?
I'm here. I'm not sure what's happening. I think the Wi-Fi the site is bad. But on the question, the impact of climate change on food security. In my understanding, we get food from agriculture and fisheries. And if there's climate change, it's most likely to hit agricultural sector and fishing sectors. And then if those two sectors are hit by climate change, then obviously we won't get as much food produced as they are now. Example, if there is increase in temperatures, then increase in temperatures, and then we'll get decrease in yield, that in crops now, and then also in fisheries, then some of the fishes adapt very well to they have certain temperature tolerance. So now if you change that, then obviously they will not survive, and then there will be the impact. That will be all.
Thank you, Sibongile. Does anybody else want to comment on that? All right. And I'm going to move us on, I think, as we're starting to run out of time. The next section that we looked at in the course was on the problems of human population. And as we heard in the talk by Umpo, we have a seriously increasing population, an exponentially increasing population. Hlengiwe, are you connected well enough to just give us a little bit of an overview?
Is it the first question, is climate change not just a way of Earth regulating its population?
Just an overview of human population, why it's a problem.
Why is human population a problem?
Yes.
Oh, okay. How can I say? With increasing human population on Earth, I think we have what you call the certain level where the Earth can only sustain people, and if we keep increasing that, then we're going to run out of resources. So with more people living on Earth and competing for the same resources such as food and such as food, the chances are that there will be more people are going to that food because there won't be enough for everyone. But also because there's limited space, the chances of diseases spreading quickly are increased as well because of people being in contact with each other more often as well. Okay, this is I tend to go blank when I'm speaking. Can someone also please help?
That's fine. That's fine. You're breaking up a little bit, but we got most of that. I'd like to, I mean, we're just thinking about human population and thinking about the pressures that it places on the various systems that we've learnt about. We had only a few questions from students, and they're quite a philosophical nature. The first two were from Christy Munro and Emily Payne. Is climate change and disease and the lack of resources really just a natural way of regulating human population? I'll stick that first to Lauren.
Okay, so when I looked at this question, I struggled to think of a way to answer it because it's not really necessarily answerable. So I didn't want to give my opinion on the matter, and so I looked into a couple of things. And thinking about what we have learned today already, I said that we have a common ancestor with all life on this planet. Remember, I mentioned Luca, and we already share around 8 to 9% of our DNA with certain viruses and certain bacteria. Now, as much as the question asks if viruses like the HIV virus are an actual way of keeping the human population down. I mean, that's a fair enough question because viruses are so often associated with epidemics that are accompanied by great mortality, AIDS being one of them, smallpox being one of them, even influenza, so just flu. But you must remember that viruses have to interact with their hosts in a more subtle way through symbiosis. And the virus-like components of the human genome actually amount to almost half of our DNA, and some of it plays a critical role in our biology. Viruses didn't evolve to control the human population because that would imply consciousness. And most viruses don't actually kill us because killing the host is risky. And they have to borrow our machinery to replicate, so their life cycle involves forming an intimate partnership with us. So are viral genes sometimes useful to mammals? Well, in fact, yes. And retroviruses have undergone a long co-evolutionary relationship with us. And you can confirm this by looking for viral genes that have been conserved within our own genome. And there's an example of this that I think is quite relevant to this section. And it's a remnant of a retrovirus that invaded the primate genome. So that would have been a little less than 14 million years ago. And it became part of our DNA. And this gene used to code for a protein that was used for the virus's envelope, so for its external structure. But today, we actually use it, and it's critical to the functioning of the human placenta. So we co-evolve with viruses. They are not necessarily a natural way of controlling the human population. It's just that they're part of they're part of the ecosystem within which we evolve, and there is a constant state of flux and symbiosis or parasitism. But no, I would say on the whole, the answer to that question is no.
Okay, that's a very, very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much, Lauren. As opposed to climate change and diseases, I actually saw an interesting article which postulated, in fact, homosexuality was the natural way that populations are regulated. And so much as every animal species in the world displays homosexuality, and it would appear that there's a link between the density of populations and the rate of homosexuality within that population. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. I want to get to the next question, as also able by Lauren, and it comes from just close to 1 billion people in the world, heading on to the 9, in fact, quite soon. What can we make growing, especially in developing countries? If you can hear me, I'd like to put that first to Hlengiwe. Can you hear us, Hlengiwe?
Yes, is it from Cueva? The question from Cueva?
That's correct.
For that question, I think one of the answers that have always come up was the education of women, that educate more women and to give them more skills, and they are able to do other things other than be at home. They are able to make choices for themselves. Then the chances are women that having kids later on in their lives, and they also try to limit the number of kids because they're also concentrating on their careers as well. Also, the other thing would probably be to increase the health system within the developing countries, in terms of ensuring, in terms of promoting and supporting family planning, to help families to plan ahead in terms of how many kids they can have, and government can assist with that in terms of giving incentivizing families that practice family planning, and not that to say we must limit the number of children people have, but then to say that from if people have a certain number of families, then the government will be able to support them, because once you go above 7, 8, social welfare becomes a lot to support within the families. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm sorry. I keep going blank as I answer. Can someone please assist me?
Do you want me to jump in, Carl? Oh, HOPEMAN's got something to say. Carl, Can you hear anybody? I think we're offline.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay, there we go. Hope, we're waiting for what you were adding.
Oh, okay. I was just adding to that case where they
Can't
mentioned.
hear me?
Yes, you can hear you, Carl. Yeah, I was just adding to that about that there's 7 billion people in the world, and whether measures can be set to stabilize the growing populations. One case is one that China did implement on the population, so that the population can actually be controlled. So I don't know if I should classify that as a control mechanism, but one awareness they made was that women should not be having more than 2 children, so to say. So in terms of, and China is still a developing country, so in terms of whether we could stabilize the population and so forth, I would say that it has to do with whether the number that is required. For example, we would want a population, but we wouldn't want overpopulation, because remember, it's all about demand and supply, and whether can the resources that are available in a country be able to support the emerging population. So that actually depends more on such issues, so to say. Because if we have overpopulation, then we might be striving to equally distribute resources. Yeah, that's my take on that.
If I can jump in on the back of on the back of unequal distribution of resources. One of the things that I found yesterday when I was looking at the number of deaths per year from influenza in the USA, one of the numbers that I found is that 300,000 people in the USA per year die from obesity-related illnesses. And when it comes to the unequal distribution of resources, as much as population numbers are a thing, I think we always need to keep in mind that the way that we consume is incredibly important. And I'm sure Guy will jump in as the population optimist, as he said in the background. And I agree with him. I'm a population optimist. I feel that it's about education and giving women empowerment of their own bodies and their own decisions, but also about a better resource distribution and the way that we consume. So that's my little contribution.
Nice one. Thank you, Lauren. Unless Guy is desperately burning to say something, I'm going to push on because having started late, we're running out of time. Guy, can I move on? I'll take that as a yes, absence of a response. We're going to talk about the last one of the topics that we have in the course this week, and that was sustainable development. I'm hoping, Teboho, you can just give us a little bit of an overview of sustainable development, please. You've been very quiet there, Teboho. Just remember to put your microphone on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I back?
All right. Sustainable development basically is about ensuring that we use our resources today such that we don't endanger the future of future generations. That's really all it is about. And you have to look at social aspects, economic aspects, and environmental aspects. So those are the 3 tiers of sustainable development.
Thank you very much, Teboho. That's perfect. That's really nice. Our first question in this section comes from Oko Soshange, and her question is, what are climate change mitigation measures? And I'm going to put that to Guy if we have him back.
Hi there.
We had Guy back for the words hi there. Hello, Guy. All right, in the absence of Guy, Teboho, just have a go at that.
Sorry, the question again, Carl?
What are climate change mitigation?
Or climate mitigation options? Well, climate mitigation options really we have to look at measures that ensure that we do not continue to emit more GHG emissions. So this are, some of them are renewable resources, energy resources like wind power development, using solar voltaic generation means, and walking, for instance, is also a mitigation measure. So if you walk and you don't use vehicles, that's also a mitigation measure. So we have to really look at all means of production for energy or for transportation or for food production where we do not emit GHG emissions. Guys, back.
Cool. Thank you, Teboho. Yes, I can see guys there. Guy, are you with us again? Okay, great, great. Just to sum up, Teboho, I mean, climate mitigation measures are those steps which involve trying to avoid climate change from happening, which is contrasted against climate adaptation, which is basically those measures which we just try and do something about it and try and adapt our lives to it. I'm going to put the second question then. It comes from Holly Nell to Guy, which is basically, why is some pressure put on worldwide governments by scientists in order to prevent something like climate change?
No, but pressure is being put on governments by scientists and by a wide range of people. Actually, scientists occupy a slightly difficult position because we need to be honest brokers and try not to be on one side or another, but try to look at the evidence in a balanced way. So it's a very difficult line to walk. But clearly, when the evidence becomes so clear and so strong, scientists as people also want to speak up and say that the evidence is very, very strong. But if you look at an organization like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there are mechanisms in place to make sure that the full range of evidence is looked at and that the answers are balanced. So there is a lot of pressure from science on governments, and we saw yesterday morning that President Obama and the Chinese President Xi Jinping have agreed to both, as the major emitters on the planet, together emitting probably close to 60% of emissions. They are both now going to engage in ways to mitigate their emissions. And that is a huge step forward for avoiding dangerous climate change.
Okay, you've touched on this already, actually, in that answer, and Teboho's touched on it. But given Nkosi has asked a really, really big question, and that's, what do the nations of the world have to do to reduce global warming, and do we still have enough time to do it? And that's back to Guy.
Well, yes, so there are a wide range of things that they can do. Essentially, they've got to adjust their energy policies and try to get off the fossil fuel addiction that the planet has been on since the 40s and 50s. And this now appears to be really gathering steam, as I said, with the two major emitters having gone into an agreement. I mean, China's got a real problem with air pollution as well, which is related to fossil fuel emissions, and it's affecting people's health. So there are many, many benefits to moving away from fossil fuels, and it really looks as though we could start to do that. There is time. I'm an optimist. I think there's not plenty of time, but there's time to get it right. And we're an infinitely creative species, so we'll find ways to get around it. And we've got an economic system which is very creative and is able to adjust to shocks like this in all sorts of ways. So I think there's a huge opportunity. And if you're a youngster, becoming an expert in climate change adaptation is probably going to be a good place to be going forward. So some kind of an environmental engineer in adaptation, you're going to have a job for a while.
So it's nice to hear from you guys. And Guy's opinion is very much the measures there is time. For anybody on the panel who thinks that we're all screwed, that it's too late.
Not even. Well, we're not necessarily screwed, Carl, but at the moment, at least, I'm at the climate change conference right now, and they're saying that there's already a certain amount of GHGs in the atmosphere, and from that alone, we are already going to feel the impact, or at least the future generations will feel the impact. So what we are doing, we are going to do at the moment in terms of mitigation will help future generations, but there is an amount of GHGs we can't do anything about. I guess that's about all I can add.
Yeah, I mean, Guy might correct me on this. The lifetime of CO2 in the atmosphere is decades, right, Guy? So CO2 that's been put in there will hang around for decades.
Yeah, that's true, and also there's a lot of energy in the ocean. So the heat, even if we were to stop emitting today, the atmosphere would continue to warm for several decades. Ice will continue to melt for possibly decades to centuries. So yeah, there is an amount of unavoidable climate change that we will experience, and that's why I say get into the game of climate adaptation if you want a job. But it's not. I don't think it's not unsurvivable. And as a species, you know, there are all sorts of ways that we can adapt to this. Of course, if we continue to emit greenhouse gases at the current rate, you know, towards the end of the century, things become very, very difficult to adapt to. So we need to turn things around in the next decade or two if we're to have a good chance of adapting and having a good life for our kids and our grandchildren. But I think there is time to do that.
Okay, thanks, Guy. It's a very, very nice answer. And I think we've answered the majority of the questions there. I'd like to therefore move forward to geoengineering. And the first question we have on geoengineering comes from Nchaba, who basically asks us to start us off, what is geoengineering? So I'm going to send that again to Guy, please.
Yeah, geoengineering is engineering at a global scale. That's what it's trying to imply. So it's trying to use various ways of changing the energy balance of the planet over vast areas. So this would include things like putting tiny little particles into the upper atmosphere to shield us from the rays of the sun, to reflect the rays of the sun back out, and to act as a kind of an umbrella, a parasol, or bring iron into the oceans over vast areas to encourage them to take up CO2 out of the atmosphere via photosynthesis, because the ocean photosynthesis is limited by iron, and if you add iron, you can get these vast algal blooms in the Southern Ocean, for example. So that's what geoengineering is about. It's thinking big at planetary scale and doing things to control the climate by turning the climate knob, which I think is a very dangerous direction to go in.
Okay, thank you for that. And it is a well-established sentiment among scientists that it is a very dangerous direction to go in, and one that you would only want to go in as a last resort. Whereas economists tend to quite it, because it offers the ability of all the benefits of burning fossil fuels as they see it, without any of its. But we can touch on a response to that in the next question, which comes from Nchaba, who asks, are any geoengineering solutions looking promising, and which one, if we wanted to pick one? And I'll first go to Guy with that, but he disappeared again. So I'm going to go to Teboho. You might have an opinion.
Carl?
Yeah, Teboho, geoengineering. Which solution do you think would work, if any?
Geothermal maybe, but I really don't have a strong opinion on this one, Carl.
Okay, Lauren? Lauren, put your microphone on.
Is it now unmuted? Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm perhaps not the best person to ask about this. As you know, geoengineering is sort of one of my pet hates. I specifically work in the Southern Ocean, and I know that iron fertilization has been quite like a hot topic in my region, and it's touted as the most promising form of geoengineering with the least amount of impact. But of course, we know this to be not true. In terms of the most promising geoengineering out there, I don't know if there is anything that would be more effective than just managing the emit. So I'm perhaps not the best person to ask about this.
Well, just to add on that.
Somebody, Hope, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. I would have to say, as with any engineering discipline, geoengineering would have to be really tested thoroughly over time, because you remember that climate is a very sensitive thing. So if we are to alter it in any case, I mean, for example, all the engineered products are thoroughly tested. They go through a phase called testing. So one key question or one key component will be that how do we test? How do we sort of like test geoengineering? Do we test it, and when we test it, where do we test it? Where do we perform the test and so forth? So actually, since it is an emerging discipline, I would say that there has to be a lot of test cases that have to be undergone so that we can actually confirm that this one works and so forth. But as of now, I haven't come across one that really works effectively. That's my take on that.
In every environmentalist's least favorite popular person, Bjorn Lomborg's book on smart solutions to climate change, he has a table at the end of it where he's different geoengineering possible solutions, and on the one axis he has the amount of impact the solution would have on solving the problem, and on the other axis he has how dangerous it is for going horribly wrong. And the winner is by a country mile is the idea of using ships to whiten clouds above the oceans. That has a very low possible chance of disaster and a very high effect, at least in models, on mitigating for climate change. Guy, have you anything very briefly to say on the best possible geoengineering?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I mean, economists thought that they had the world's economy under control in the late 1990s, and then they crashed the economy in 2007. So I don't trust economists, number one. Although, okay, he calls himself a statistician. Yeah, I just think that what you end up with when you get into that state, and I don't deny that maybe you could do something through that mechanism, but what you end up with then is a control knob for the climate, and then who gets to decide where to set that knob? So in South Africa, we might want to have the climate 2 degrees cooler, and in Russia, they might want to have the climate 4 degrees warmer. And you know what Putin's like. So then everybody's going to be fighting over the world's climate knob. And I just think that's a shocking place to be in. We just don't want to go there. And we have a historical climate that we know what it was like. Our economic system is adapted to it, and we should try to stay to that as closely as we can. We get into all sorts of trouble when we really start fine-tuning the world's climate knob and getting too much control over it. That's my concern, ultimately.
Cool, thank you. I think it's a really interesting discussion, but one which we'll have to contain. I realised we're at the hour allotted time. We started 5 minutes late, 5 or 10 minutes late. I'm going to just run on and try and finish a few of the last questions. I want to move on to grilling Teboho a bit on sustainable energy, which is his speciality, or specialism, I say. And so, Hector say it's up for 15 years for a wind farm to become sustainable. What's a recent development in this technology? So, Teboho, you're up. Don't get your microphone on.
One, we need to start with the 15 years. It does not take 15 years for wind farms to be sustainable. What happens is the wind, the energy that is used to produce, say for instance, a 2-megawatt wind turbine, when you look at the life cycle energy, it's paid back in at most 1 year. So for the other 19 years, if the lifetime of your wind turbine is 20 years, you're basically producing without emitting emissions. So you can say basically the energy payback time is less than 1 year. So it's not 15 years. And on the question whether there is a shift to clean energy sources is effective in combating climate change, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of greenhouse gases that we already have in the atmosphere at the moment, we can't do anything about. But yes, the shift towards renewables does help in the sense that we will not emit more, and therefore future generations will be able to benefit. So basically, it's avoiding emissions which we would have from fossil fuels.
Teboho, Tabile Gulu asks basically as to what are the alternatives out there to coal. Could you give us a quick summary of the best renewable alternative to coal?
Yes. Well, in terms of only climate change, alternatives include wind power, concentrated solar power, hydro, nuclear. Well, nuclear is a contentious issue in other respects, but in terms of mitigating climate change, it's one of the alternatives which we actually have within the plans of South Africa to develop in the coming years. Also, shale gas or natural gas, if you like, is an alternative. You also get emissions from shale, but compared to coal, there are less emissions. So those are some of the alternatives that could be into. In fact, we are looking into them within South Africa.
Okay, and you're involved in wind energy in South Africa. I've noticed that we are getting a few more turbines. There are big expansion plans.
Sorry, Carl?
In terms of wind energy.
Yes. Well, there are. So there's a program called the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program. Within that program, wind farm developers have already been given the go-ahead to develop wind plants. So some are already operational, but maybe less than 50% are already operational. But yes, there are already developments of wind farm happening in the Western and in the Eastern Cape.
Sorry, nice one. Thank you, Teboho. And then lastly, in this section, Henrik Oliver asks a really difficult question, and that's how can we best solve the problem of pollution from motor vehicles?
Let's stop driving them. Anyway, there are quite a number of ways to approach the problem or try and solve the problem, and there's no one single solution which is the best. A combination of all the solutions I'm going to propose are the best. So we look at things like modal shift. So this would involve basically using public transport, because when you use public transport, you tend to transport more people than private transportation, so that will have an impact. And cycling is one of the solutions to this. Also, there are options within the quality of cars. So in some countries, people are not allowed through legislation to use a car for more than 10 years. So, and also one other solution could be developing emission standards. So this would ensure that cars that emit a certain amount, which we deem to be high, are not allowed on our roads. The other thing is using biofuels. Now, a lot of research still needs to be done on this, but they tend to emit less than our conventional petrol and diesel. So the question from here is, how do you get people to use public transport? How do you get people to cycle or even walk when they don't need to drive cars? So these are some of the challenges, but the solutions are there. Problem is implementation. So is it legislative, or should we look into changing of perceptions?
Thank you, Teboho. I wonder if public transport is worthwhile, because all public transport really does is make the roads clear for richer people who have cars. I mean, the more people you persuade to go on public transport just clears the roads for those who have super big BMWs and just want to drive faster, less efficient cars. But I would add that the electric car solves the problem of emissions from cars if you can generate cheap, clean electricity. And so then that really just pushes the question of how do we solve car emissions to how do we generate cheap and clean electricity? And then, of course, that's where you come in, Teboho.
Yes. Well, that's one other aspect of it, Carl. But on the issue of just clearing roads for people with money, what other countries have done is they charge a whole lot of money for people, well, rich people, to be in their cars on the roads. So that money could actually maybe be then diverted to developing cleaner means of producing electricity. So there are a lot of issues around it, but at the moment, if you look at the Gautrain, for instance, and people being picked up from the Gautrain using the Gautrain buses and whatever, so there are solutions that tend to be working to a certain extent. But of course, there are some other issues that need to be taken off.
Thanks, Teboho.
All right.
I'm going to move on to the last question for today, which comes from Ashley Jalazi. And they ask that as climate change is already affecting the world's poor and most vulnerable people, how can we manage to maintain the balance between development and climate change and mitigating climate change? And if we still have you, Hlengiwe, do you want to start?
With how can you balance development and climate change? I think for countries like in Africa, South Africa, because we're still developing and we're still improving our infrastructure, I think the best way that would be is to go is to start off already going in a more sustainable way, ensuring that, as you are talking about the transport system, and making sure that our transport system is more carbon free, and we move away from the individualism of having our own cars, but then moving more to public transport, or if possible then electric cars. We could also, in terms of look at the housing sector and ensuring that the buildings that we are building already are energy efficient and are using less are energy efficient and use less less water, and people are okay. Let me breathe. There's and also housing systems in terms of the coastal areas. People are already not there are buffers in terms of where people are living to prevent people from being affected from climate change. So I think from the get-go, I think we need to start developing and looking at how we can make our countries more sustainable. Instead of going the route of using fossil fuels, we can start using renewable energy now, investing on our renewables energy now, so that people so that by the time we're more, it's like can someone please answer? I can't seem to get my thoughts together. Hope we can go ahead.
That was great, thank you. That's great, thank you, Hlengiwe. We can hear you perfectly. I'm going to now. We have one last question that I want to put to each one of the panel in turn, so that they can sum up. And if the panel have anything to say on any other topic, you each have 2 minutes now to answer this question, say it, and I'm going to go in the order you hear on my screen. The question comes from the scientists feel we as humans are headed towards extinction with global warming, climate change, and uncontrolled population increase. So I'm going to go firstly to Guy. Can you answer that and sum up, please?
No, my question is definitely not. I think we're known as Homo sapiens. We call ourselves Homo sapiens because we've got a brain, and we're very sociable, and we know how to figure out solutions. And if we educate people and educate ourselves, then there's every chance that we face a future of abundance and happiness and fulfillment. And that, I think, is the optimistic point of view that we should all have and that we should imbue our children with. But what we need is equality and fairness, and that's what we all have to work hard on and fight for. And if we can get it right, it will be truly amazing.
Wow, thank you, Guy. That was very concise and difficult to follow. Heck, I'm going to put you in a difficult position. How we all do? Okay, I don't think we're getting it. Hlengiwe, what are you?
What's the question?
With climate change and overpopulation, are humans doomed?
Is it the one? Do you feel that the humans are heading towards an extension of accelerated global warming and climate change?
Yeah, are we all doomed?
Not really. If we start, if we start working towards actions like to reduce the climate change impact, I think we're not doomed. And also because there are people like us who are already researching about this. There are people out there who are researching about this, and they're trying to make an impact. And I think we're not really doomed. It's just that we need to work together and stop working in silos and collaborating with private sector, government, and everyone trying to work together into reducing the impacts of climate change. So I don't think we're doomed. It's just that if we can collaborate together and put our thoughts together, we can work it out.
Thank you, Hlengiwe. I'm going to put that. Please be succinct. 2 minutes, max.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Just to sum up, climate change is a very broad and very interesting topic. It can't end on just one day. I'm sorry, the construction guys just decided to come in. But I think that for South Africa as a whole, climate change has more impact on development and so forth, since South Africa is one of the developing countries, and that we should put more focus on that as well. So yeah, so for example, in the cases of so for the cases of sustainable development, we could as well introduce more innovations that can help South Africa so that we can be part of the green emissions that are now overcoming and that are going to be overchanging, because the fact is they are going to come. And for example, looking at projections such as 2025, what we want to see is that coal emissions be actually highly reduced from the total world population, so to say. So yeah, we need more development on that. Yeah, that's my summary on that. Carl.
Thank you. Laura? Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. My computer's been freaking out a little bit. You're asking if I feel that human beings are doomed? Carl? I absolutely think that we are not. I think that there's a lot of opportunity within the changes that are now irreversible. The sooner we take the stance of less doom and gloom, and more, let's roll with the punches, I think the better chance that we have. That is not to say that we shouldn't change our behavior as quickly and effectively as possible, but I certainly don't think that we're doomed. I think as a species, we have shown a tremendous capacity for innovation and creativity. I really like human beings, and I'm looking forward to see how we handle the unique set of challenges that we're facing now, particularly in Africa, African solutions for African problems. And are we doomed? Absolutely not.
Nice to see Sibongile, Madani, make sure you put your microphone on if you are.
Yes, I'm here, sorry.
Go for it.
Yes, I don't think human beings are doomed. I don't think we're doomed, because human beings, we've shown we can adapt, and if there's climate change, I'm sure adaptation will be the next strategy. And the other thing is, we're now producing and creating things that are more efficient to deal with climate change. Are we heading to extinction? I think that's a bit too much to admit to. I don't think we're gonna extinction.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, let's hear from the pessimist himself, Teboho. Don't forget to
okay, just a different element to the argument. There are people, the temperature rises that we fear. There are people who have been living under those conditions for hundreds of years now. If we look at people in the Sahara, and they've been able to survive without technology or anything. So maybe we need to go and learn from them, and we might just survive. So that's my answer. And chances are we might even kill ourselves first before climate change does away with us. But yes. Can you hear me, Carl?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you, Teboho. That was nice. So I can conclude the session by saying that about 6.5 out of 7 scientists definitely say that we're smart enough and have the tools to survive. So we can end the session on a positive note. I'd like to thank very much all of the panel for their contributions, and I'd like to thank the students themselves for their questions. This has been a really, really interesting and informative series, and I hope that this will go on again next year. So thank you guys all very much, and goodbye.
Thanks, Carl.